Are you struggling to figure out whether someone qualifies for authorship on your research manuscript? Has someone contributed to the work, but you're not sure if they meet the criteria for authorship? Or do you feel obligated to add someone as an author who doesn't qualify, but think that doing so would be unethical? In my training as a graduate student, experience as a clinical researcher, and nearly 15-year career in scientific and medical editing, I've seen a lot of healthy debates about authorship, but also some heated disputes and unethical authorship practices. So I'm putting together a 3-part series of videos that cover everything that you need to know about authorship. In this video, you'll learn what qualifies as authorship and what to do when someone doesn't qualify. And you'll learn what are some unethical practices with authorship, including a few scenarios that I often see among research teams. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal. Since 2011, I've collaborated with researchers to help them publish in high-impact journals and secure federal and foundation funding. And I've trained thousands of researchers and other professional writers all over the world to equip them with the principles, resources, and systems that they need to write well. So, what are the criteria that qualify someone for authorship? Most journals in science and medicine follow guidelines by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, or ICMJE. But not all journals follow these guidelines, so be sure to check the author guidelines of the journal that you plan to submit to, or the preferred style guide for that particular journal. I'll also add a link to the ICMJE guidelines in the description box. So, according to the ICMJE, whether someone qualifies for authorship is based on 4 criteria, and authors need to meet all 4 of these criteria, not just one or some of them, all 4. So the first criterion is that authors must give substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data for the work. Now, this criterion is the trickiest one because what is considered a substantial contribution is subjective. And we'll get into how to manage that in the 3rd video of this series. The second criterion is that authors must have been involved in drafting the work or reviewing it critically for important intellectual content. The 3rd criterion is that authors must give final approval of the version to be published. And the 4th criterion is that the authors must agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. Now, I cannot stress enough that to be listed on the byline, authors need to meet all 4 of these criteria. Unless, of course, the journal has different guidelines, so be sure to check the guidelines for the particular journal that you will submit to. So, what are some unethical practices in authorship? One main type of unethical authorship is honorary authorship, and there are 3 subtypes of honorary authorship. One is gift authorship, which is authorship given out of respect or gratitude for someone. So I've seen gift authorship given to a department head or a collaborator who maybe reviewed the paper but was not otherwise involved in the project. So they do not meet all 4 criteria for authorship. I've also seen gift authorship given to a resident or a medical student or an undergraduate student or maybe a summer intern who might have done a few experiments or helped with data collection, but then they moved on and were not otherwise involved in the project and they didn't even read the paper. So these are practices that are unethical because the authors need to meet all 4 criteria. Now, the good news is that I think this practice can be easily avoided, and we'll talk about how to do that in the 3rd video of this series. Another type of honorary authorship is guest authorship, and this is when authorship is given to a well-known researcher to try to amplify the quality or prestige of the work. For example, authors might want to grant authorship to a renowned researcher at a prestigious institution who had no part in the project, or they don't meet all 4 ICMJE criteria. So in these cases, the authors hope that including the researcher's name on the paper will help them boost the status of the paper or the exposure of the paper. But this practice is unethical. Now, guest authorship and gift authorship might seem similar, but the difference has to do with intention. So gift authorship is given out of gratitude and respect, and guest authorship is given to try to boost prestige or status. So another type of honorary authorship that can actually be associated with gift or guest authorship is pressured authorship. And this is when authorship is given to a person of authority who pressures more junior staff. For example, a mentor who pressures their graduate student or postdoc to give someone authorship who doesn't qualify. Or a department head who pressures faculty in their department to give them authorship. Now, I've seen this happen and have actually stopped working with authors who follow this practice. Now, I know that not everyone can do that, and these situations can certainly be challenging to navigate. But in another video in this series, I'll share a strategy you can use to ensure that all authors qualify for authorship. So another type of unethical authorship is ghost authorship. And ghost authorship occurs when a contributor is not listed as an author, even if they qualify for authorship. So this scenario is more likely to happen if, for example, your team hires a writer to work on the paper, and the writer is deeply involved in the project enough that they qualify for authorship. But the author team decides to leave the contributor's name off the byline. Now, sometimes the contributor would prefer not to be listed as an author. For example, although I might substantively edit a paper, I rarely qualify for authorship. So when authors say that they want to add me to the byline, I respectfully say no thank you. But if the person qualifies for authorship and chooses not to be on the byline, be sure to get that in writing so that you don't have any sticky situations to navigate later. So another type of authorship to consider is AI authorship. And this is when AI-assisted tools, such as large language models, are used to write part of the manuscript or help with part of the procedures in that particular study. So when large language models really emerged, there was a particular paper on which the authors listed ChatGPT in the byline. And that paper drew a lot of attention to whether AI tools should be listed in the byline. But because AI cannot be responsible for the accuracy, for the integrity, for the originality of the work, large language models do not meet the criteria for authorship. Now, there's a good chance that you are using AI in some form to help with your research or writing, even if it's something as simple as using Grammarly. Later in this video, we'll talk about how to acknowledge your use of AI in the paper. Now, what do you do if a contributor does not qualify for authorship? How can you give them credit for the work they did on the project without using an unethical practice? When a contributor does not meet the criteria for authorship, they should be acknowledged. And most often, these details are included in a dedicated acknowledgement section, but some journals want certain details in separate sections. I'll share a few examples, but be sure to check the author guidelines. One of the most important contributors to acknowledge in your paper are the funding sources. Now, some journals request that the funding sources be shared in a separate section within the manuscript. But if they don't, you want to acknowledge the funding sources in the acknowledgement section first, because you want to give that source the most credit, because the work would not be possible without their support. So this might be a federal grant, a foundation grant, department funds, institution funds, or even a donor who might have supported the work in the project. Then you want to acknowledge other people who contributed to the work but do not qualify for authorship. For example, you might want to acknowledge people who contributed research materials such as a plasmid or a reagent or equipment. Or you might want to acknowledge people who contributed effort to the project, such as someone who carried out a particular procedure but were not otherwise involved in the project. So this might be appropriate for a lab manager, a lab technician, a clinical research coordinator, a medical student, a resident, a summer intern, someone who contributed effort but doesn't meet all 4 criteria for authorship. You also might want to acknowledge someone who gave administrative support, such as a grants department or an administrative assistant who helped you format the paper or submit the paper or prepare figures for the paper. You also want to acknowledge anyone who contributed with writing, with editing, or with reviewing the paper, and anyone who helped with graphic design or illustration. And some people will acknowledge staff in their department or the patients who participated in the study. These are just a couple of examples. Now, you don't want to acknowledge your family and friends. You can certainly send them a personal thank you, and I definitely encourage you to do that. But these details are not appropriate to include in a manuscript. Also, when you acknowledge a contributor, be sure to state specifically how they contributed to the work. So, for example, you want to state that a particular funding source provided funding and then include things like the grant number. Or if someone contributed a research material, you would say Marie Curie provided the plasmid or collected data or edited the manuscript, whatever specific tasks they did to support the project. Now, earlier I mentioned that AI-assisted technology do not qualify for authorship. So how do you acknowledge these tools in your manuscript? So different journals have different guidelines, and these guidelines will likely evolve as AI continues to evolve. So be sure to check the author instructions. But right now, as of June 2025, the ICMJE guidelines and many journals ask authors to disclose use of AI-assisted technology in 2 places. The first is in the cover letter that you submit with your manuscript, and the second is in the main text. And the guidelines indicate that you want to describe how you used AI in certain sections of the manuscript. So, for example, if you used AI for writing assistance, you want to acknowledge AI in the acknowledgments section. But if you used AI for data collection, analysis, figure generation, or part of the procedures, you want to disclose those details in the methods section. So you might be asking yourself what you should do when facing situations about unethical authorship. My best advice is to do the ethical thing. I have certainly been in situations when I asked not to be included on the byline or even acknowledged in the paper because I learned about an unethical authorship practice. I've even stopped working with authors who use tactics like gift authorship and guest authorship and pressured authorship. But I recognize that not everyone can do that. So you have to make the best choice for yourself. But I also encourage you to talk to someone. It might just be a conversation with the author team or your supervisor or department head. In some cases, it might be better to talk to an ethics professional or an administrative office. But I truly believe that with careful planning and communication, these unethical authorship situations and other scenarios can be avoided. But this is already a long video, and I want to be respectful of your time because I'm so grateful that you're here sharing it with me. So I will share a strategy that you can use in the 3rd video in this series. And in the next video, I will share how you can choose the order of the authors in the byline of your manuscript. So be sure to subscribe so you're the first to know when it posts. And if you liked this video, you might also like this one about the best order to draft sections of a research manuscript. And if there's something in particular that you'd like to learn more about, let me know in the comments. I create these videos for you, so I want to make sure I'm creating something that you will find valuable. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next video.